So, hello everybody. Uh, we're going to talk tonight about framing with integrity, honesty, and authenticity, and then I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Don't be afraid to stop me because I do want to leave some time to talk about the convention, which was really something else, really really cool. So, let's dive right in. So the first part is really easy. Tell the truth without an intent to deceive. That's what we like to do as liberals. We like to, tell the truth, and if we're not sure what the truth is, we have our authorities to consult, basically science, history, you know, uh, experts on this, and that's great. But just tell the truth, and it doesn't get a whole lot harder than that on the honesty thing. But a question that comes up from time to time in the workshops and when we talk about this is framing manipulation? And that is, that's an excellent question. I mean, we've learned about how the brain works. Framing as we do it is really a technology. It's the application of scientific knowledge to the real world. And with any science, its application can be used for good or for evil. And we've seen how Republican operatives intentionally use this knowledge to lie and distract, mislead, and so one of my favorite words, food, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and propaganda, which is by definition an attempt to use psychological tricks to deceive. Here's Svengali doing just that. And so I am not at all recommending that you should do this. You should not use this knowledge to intentionally fool voters. Not that you would, I don't believe you would, but I'm just saying it for the record. But is it manipulation? I would put it to you that every time you open your mouth, a message comes out. Every word you say is going to carry meaning with it. It's going to land in somebody's brain, and it's going to set off a cascade of connected frames in their head, and neurons are going to go wild, and it's going to happen. So the question is how good is that message, and is your message truthful, and will it give the voter a new positive way to see the things we do? So if what you say is done with integrity, honesty, and authenticity, then you're using the technology for good. That's what we want. So remember, you're offering a positive, constructive, and hopeful way to change the world for the better. And if you truly believe what you say, then you have a duty to be brave and bold about your ideas. We sometimes worry about this. I know I am not faulting candidates in any way on this. Candidates feel the need to move to the right. The reason they do is because liberals haven't done our messaging job that we should have been doing over the last 40 years. And so they're put in this position. But we need to be brave and bold about our ideas. We need to say what we truly believe and stay off of their messages. Say what you are offering. Tell the voter what the benefit is. It's like the old sales thing, your feature, function, and benefit, or feature, advantage, and benefit. Tell people what they're getting if they go with our ideas. Be on your message. That's part of having integrity, making sure you're getting your message out. And a lot of times we spend too much time, as we've talked about a zillion times before, spending too much time worrying about what Trump just said or what weird thing the Republicans have just done. With a nod to Michelle Obama, take the high ground. I think she's just right. When they go low, we go high. That's integrity. That's not stooping to the levels that we see from the president and others. You can show a contrast between yourself as a candidate or yourself as a Democrat by your example of integrity. If you don't get pulled into crazy arguments, if you just talk about what you care about and why you care, and you just keep doing that, your integrity will come through. And then the one last duty you have as a person with integrity in your messaging is that you're going to go for the larger goal that we have of building our worldview in people's brains. It used to be a very popular worldview until the Republicans spent an awful lot of money and 40 years, almost 50 now, trying to change that, and they've been very successful using the knowledge we've been learning about. So, about propaganda again. Propaganda is an intent to deceive, and it's built on logical fallacies. The idea is people want to seem logical. They seem like they want to reason things out, but propaganda is a way to trick that reason. And so you have a responsibility to not use that. And let me give you an example of a propaganda trick and its logical fallacy. The ad hominem attack, which is basically a personal attack on somebody else or their family or something, with the idea that drawing attention to something negative about a person is therefore proof that their ideas are wrong, which is a logical fallacy. Person can be a complete nasty, nasty person and actually have good ideas, and vice versa. So that kind of an attack is an attempt to get people to derail the logical thinking so it goes into a direction that sounds logical but isn't. And most people, when they're logically thinking, because it's not our default position of thinking. It's not what we do all the time. We're normally just in a response mode, in an emotional mode. That having a lot, somebody messing with our logic, a lot of this can happen at a more unconscious level. We're not really aware that it's happening. So again, you don't want to be personal. You don't want to say something about someone's family or their appearance. That does not show integrity. Next. So does this make sense? Any questions up to this point? Okay. So another question we get an awful lot is, should we go negative? And so I want to talk about negativity and positivity, and in the way I look at negativity, there's negativity that is nasty and personal, and there's negativity that's truthful. Some people feel that if you say the truth about your opponent, and that truth is not a happy truth about your opponent, then you're being negative. I don't believe that's being negative. I think it's being truthful. If you're truthful, you deal with facts, and you're not engaging in propaganda and ad hominem, then there's no prohibition about saying something that shows that your opponent has done something that people might not like.
So, like thinking of the Democratic National Convention and Michelle Obama, one of her lines about Trump was, we just think he's not up to the job. And that's kind of factual, right? Because he's sort of proven that he's not up to the job. They didn't go nasty. They didn't attack his family or his appearance or even that kind of thing. It was just don't think he's up to the job. And so you could say that's going negative, but I don't know that that's like it's a kind of a factual thing. And it wasn't really mean. It was almost like he's just can't do it. That's just it.
Well, and I would also say that I don't know that I would say that about every opponent. In Trump's case, he's basically, he gives examples daily that he's not up to the job.
So can you say then because he shows daily? Because there is truth to that everybody really knows, probably even his supporters deep down inside, that then it's okay to say that because there is a truth to that.
Yeah, I wouldn't level the charge at somebody that they're incompetent unless they've really, even if they've been incompetent once or twice, I wouldn't level that charge against them unless they were like Trump and basically proves it every single day. And you can point to things where he didn't know something or did things that harm the country without... Anyway, so, okay, let me move on here to, which is still in this vein here, fear. And people wonder, because we see fear used an awful lot on the right, and should we use it? Because fear can be very effective. It's a very powerful emotion. And people ask us this quite a bit. And I would say it's a legitimate question. If it is possible, or if it's a powerful emotion, maybe we should use it. Well, I think you have to be very, very careful. You can, but I think it has to be done so carefully because otherwise you can backfire. Let me show you. Oop, where's my other slide? Sorry. There it is. Here's the thing that happens when people are made afraid. The first thing that goes is that their ability to reason diminishes as the fear increases. The more afraid you are, the less likely you are to be considering facts and trying to reason about things. That obviously is a plus for somebody who wants to keep people from reasoning. That also causes people to close ranks for protection. That's why fear is a great thing to use, as Trump does, on his base. The more scared he gets them, the more they're going to flock together for protection. Who are they going to look to for protection? Trump, who some of them believe was sent by God to do this. And fear also is quite often directed against an other, which engenders hate and also dehumanization. So if you can make that feared person dehumanized, you can then, it gets okay to do things to that person that you wouldn't otherwise do. You can suspend the golden rule. So, okay. And then, so how do you talk about the real dangers people have every right to be afraid of? Effective framing is all about morality and what's right and wrong, and you can talk about what's wrong. Okay, and so you want to do that in this way. Tell stories about the effects of bad policy on real people. You're always better off with a good story. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But if you can, rather than saying statistics and just going deep into policy, just say what happens. If we do this, then this is what happens to real people. If there's not people in your messaging, you're missing something. You really want to do that as much as possible. Also, explicitly state what's right and wrong. And then, of course, as we always say why you care. It's important. And when you say why you care, try to either use one of the value words that we have had out there and that you can download on the website, or evoke that idea. If it's equity, if it's empathy, whatever, find a way to evoke that idea in your message. You don't have to use the exact word, but that's what you're after. And so the bottom line is that if stories about real effects of bad policy on real people, stories about bad policy, it's an honest fear. If people are afraid, it's a fear based on actual fact and your honest presentation of that fact. Again, why it's so important to be honest. And crucially important in this part and for integrity is that the point here is not to trash your opponent. It's to note the falsehood and then open a pathway to the discussion about the positive effects of our policies on real people. And that's important. We're going to talk a little bit about another way to do that, about noting the falsehoods and talking about positive things when we get into the truth sandwich a little bit later. So, let's define some terms on negativity and positivity. So a very common question we get is, should we ever go negative? And the terms I think are important to understand. A positive campaign is a campaign in which a candidate focuses primarily on relevant issues, their own views, own experiences, their own virtues, and without attacking. This is a hard campaign to run, and you were probably not going to be that virtuous of a human being, but that's what many campaigns will try to do that. I think that's important. A negative campaign is one where let me read something here that's not what's up on the screen, but negative campaign is one where a candidate uses attack ads and rhetoric to deliberately frame his opponents as foolish, inexperienced, irresponsible, disconnected, or evil as a means of presenting him or herself as a more desirable alternative to said opponent. And you can see that when you're with the rare exception of people like Trump, if you are doing those things, and I mean, inexperienced is may have truth in some cases, but then every candidate has been inexperienced at one point or another. But if you're using those tricks, then that's a negative campaign, and I don't think that's a campaign that you really want to run if you can avoid it. Now, there are some things about negativity, and I've done some research out into this, or at least on the internet and in books. And what I can tell you is the evidence about the effectiveness of negativity is all over the place. Some people said it never works. Other people say it does. Sometimes it works for you. Sometimes it hurts you. And I guess if I had to think of a way to think about this is just as the brain weighs loss more heavily than it weighs the prospect of gain. This is something that basically is research that blew up the rational actor theory in economics. But just as the brain weighs loss more than it weighs the prospect of gain, I think brains weigh negative more than positive. So negative can be powerful, but also destructive. And I think because negative can engender fear. So, but some of the things that I picked up and that I'm not really sure, I want to say that up front, but they say that negative campaigns can be unconsciously effective, that the negative thing is likely to be remembered. It tends to stick. And so people remember it. They may not even remember who said it, but if they've said it about another candidate, it will stick to that candidate. I think we've all seen examples of that, although there's no real solid evidence. A negative campaign is also inherently comparative. So if you're using a negative campaign, you're setting yours, as much as you're trashing your opponent, you are inherently putting yourself up as the alternative to that negative person. And something else that I saw was it'd been mentioned that negative campaigning is more complex and actually takes a little bit more thinking, and it activates more frames in people's brains. I'm thinking through that. I'm not really sure. I think it's more lizard brain than that, but these are some interesting things about it.
So I just ask a question.
Yeah.
So it got me thinking, for instance, Trump has been trying to paint Joe Biden as slow Joe and things like that. And so if Joe Biden can do things like he said today, I believe it was today or this weekend in an interview, that he's going to show him that he's wrong. So if you go negative on somebody but then put out a negative message that doesn't resonate with everybody, that doesn't resonate with the general population, can that work against you? Because it's like, well, you're saying that, but that's not what I observe in this person.
Well, it can, and like actually you said
Can I
earlier
just jump in on that really quickly before you answer that?
Mm-hmm.
If you're, I think Lisa, that's kind of baiting. Like you look at what Elizabeth Warren did when with the because she took the bait with Trump about the whole Pocahontas thing. So I think there's two sides to that. Like it can work for you or against you depending on how you respond to it. Because unfortunately, Elizabeth Warren took the bait at that point. He went negative. She tried to prove him wrong. She kind of got a little egg on her face doing that. And look, I'm not trying to defend the concept here at all of going negative, but I think there are two paths that you can take as a response to that. So it can work for you or against you depending on how your opponent responds to it. I just want to put that out there as a possibility.
And not taking the bait. That is a perfect example of not taking the bait. If somebody's doing that to you, then you just get into a schoolyard fight. Oh, no, I know you are, but what am I? And that gets us nowhere at all. But I think what can happen is Trump. I heard this on some pundit said this, and I thought it was right on. He said Trump has set the bar very low for Joe Biden. He was saying that slow Joe, he can't put a sentence together. Obviously, projection. You always know what Trump's weaknesses are because he tells you every day because he blames somebody else or says somebody else have them. And so then you see Joe Biden at the convention just knocking it out of the park, as did everybody else. at the convention. I very impressed. So at that point that backfired on Trump because right away Joe Biden, not by saying I'm not slow Joe, he just got up there and he was himself and he was doing what he needed to do, and it showed. Anybody who watched that and watches Trump will see two very different people. And I'd like Steve Schmidt today said this is if you know, I don't know if you know Steve Schmidt at all. He's on the Lincoln Project. He was John McCain's campaign manager. He's a Republican who is endorsing Joe Biden, and he said this is very simple. This is an election between a bad man and a good man. I said, that's it, man. He's got it. So let me just show you a couple other things about the difference between negative and positive. And again, these are things that there's still some controversy about. So I think as time goes on, we'll get more real research on this. But it's said that with negative campaigning, both candidates suffer because some people don't like people who pile on other people, and so there's that. And I think that's true. But remember, that could actually be a strategy. Because what happens when you see people battling it out on TV? What does the voters say? They say, oh, these people are crazy. This is nuts. I'm just tuning out. And then they say, I'm not even going to bother to vote because they're all the same. Right? That's a strategy. Republicans don't care if they lose a few votes on their side. They know they'll lose a lot of votes on our side. Anything that depresses voter turnout helps Republicans. That's why we're seeing so much of it now. And negative can backfire on you, as we just said. You can end up suffering some for that too. If you're really doing negative, and you would like to see some voter turnout, it can backfire and you may have less. The positive is that, or when you're using positive messaging, there's some evidence to say that the outcome is 2-to-1 over using negative messaging. So that's interesting. I want to see more data. Again, I found it hard to find things that I could trust out there. It looked like people were doing good research, but the research conflicted with each other. And then what I think is true is that a positive message can increase but not decrease your approval. So you end up with a net positive if you're positively messaging. So I thought that was kind of cool. So when you're going positive, one thing you can do is to reframe or rename the issue. Be aware of what the conservatives are saying and what they're calling things. Be aware of what their issue they're trying to make. Make sure you've uncovered the real issue, because quite often, as we've mentioned 1,000 times before, what Republicans want to talk about is usually not the real issue. They're trying to distract from it and deflect the conversation off in another direction. So really get a good handle on what the issue is, and then reframe it out of their frame with your frame. And sometimes renaming it is a thought. If they've got a name on something, you might find a name that's better for it. Also, use big plans and ideas. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean, you got to dump a 400-page, I got a plan for that on everybody's lap. But look at Obama with Hope and Change. Look at Ronald Reagan with Morning in America. Many of you have seen that. I know Jan has, and Ron has, and some others who've been in the workshop. And Morning in America was a Reagan ad way, way back, and he was talking about getting reelected. And he made some kind of almost offhand remarks about Carter's presidency, but all of it was kind of like a drug commercial. When he's doing that, there's all these happy things going on in the background. So it really was all about a big positive vision of a reborn, calmer, safer, happier America. And he ends by going, why would we want to go back to the way it was before? And
go ahead.
Much political messaging is about loss. And it's a good idea to go to gains when you're talking about your big ideas. Again, the hope and change. But give people something bigger to hope for. Maybe beyond just this particular issue and how you're solving that. You can move from that issue off to saying, yes, but see, Democrats believe everybody should have health care, however you're going to do it. And Lisa, you wanted to say something?
Oh, well, yeah, when you're talking about like the big ideas or whatever, and I'm just thinking of again last week's Democratic National Convention, and I mean other people may want to disagree with me, but what I took away from that overall, from all 4 nights, was the big message that Joe Biden is stable, that he's competent, that he's experienced, and also that he's kind and that he cares about you. And that's what I took away from that as a way, and it's sort of like a contrast with what we know Donald Trump is. But to me, it was like it was about him and how he is going to create this different kind of America by, well, actually bringing us back to what was good about America. And so that's kind of what I took. That's what I took, like the big picture idea away from that way from the Democratic National Convention.
Seemed pretty powerful. I think anybody who saw it, I think that whole convention was pretty darn powerful. So, and we should talk about that more at the end here because there were some great speeches. Some really, I was frankly surprised that it was as good as it was. So let's talk about how we address lies and distractions. Because if you're going to do this with honesty and integrity, you're going to have to say the truth, and you also have to say what the lies are. So let's take a look at what's called the truth sandwich. Okay, so the top bun is starting with the truth, which makes sense. Again, you've uncovered the real issue, so you're talking about that. And then also remember that the first to frame gets the advantage. This is one reason the conservatives, strategists are very, very sharp about this. They anticipate what our message is going to be, and they get out there and they frame first. And so that it blunts our message or confuses things. So it's very important to get out there very quickly with that stuff. Then the second thing is to indicate the lie as a distraction from that truth. I will give an example after this. And then avoid repeating your opponent's specific language and stay out of their frame. This is somewhat adapted from George Lakoff's Truth Sandwich. And then at the end, return to the truth. And always repeat truths more than lies. So that's important. Let me give you an example, and I'll just read this. For part 1, starting with the truth. When citizens vote, and this is about Trump saying vote by mail is not safe. Okay? So he's talking about a safety thing, about fraud, about nasty stuff. The truth is, when citizens vote, democracy is strong. Vote by mail is essential to voting in a pandemic. Pretty straightforward statement, didn't rebut or anything. Now, in the second part, we can indicate the lie. The president's lies about security are distractions from the GOP's widespread voter suppression that puts our right to vote, our elections, and our democracy in grave danger. That's the real issue. The real issue is voter suppression. And so it's important to say that. So we've indicated what the lie is and that it's a distraction from the reality. Third part, return to the truth and always repeat truths more than lies. So third part of the message is vote by mail is safe and secure. Voter suppression is morally wrong, anti-democratic, and racist. Let me say that again. There's the repeat part. Voter suppression is morally wrong, anti-democratic, and racist. So you see how you sandwich those things together. You've gotten your message out. Truth sandwich is a great way to not forget to have your message. But it's a great way to address it and not spend too much time talking about your opponent or his frame or what they're trying to get at. You're not repeating their message. So does that make sense, that truth sandwich? It's kind of worth practicing, and it's a little tough to master, and sometimes it takes some thought to do if it's a tough issue, because you got to do the stop, drop, and roll process to figure out what's going on in the first place. Okay, let's move to authenticity. This is really important because I think people, we hear this all the time, but people will vote for people they like, which is not very, necessarily logical. I mean, George Bush probably is a guy you'd like to have a beer with. He's probably really fun. Ronald Reagan, you'd probably want him if you're not talking politics. I mean, George Bush is fun maybe in a frat boy kind of way. Ronald Reagan would be somebody who'd be entertaining at a party, right? But it's important to be authentic because you want people to like you, and also you want people to trust you, and that trust is very important. So, things that can help you with those things are being confident. And candidates know this, and you look at skilled candidates, we all know them. We have one here, Jason. And Jason knows what he's talking about. He's confident in what he knows. He doesn't come across as being tentative in any way. And then that's really important. Also, be encouraging, positive, and hopeful. People like encouraging, positive, and hopeful people. Yes, Jason?
First of all, thank you. But this is something I've been kind of thinking about as you talked. What about levity? What about like kind of injecting comedy? We talk about framing, but what about like we're kind of bending on the concept here of charisma, which is likability. Of course, it takes authenticity, but is there do you have any thoughts on how to be a little humorous? Does that bring people in? Like just as an example, I love watching John Oliver. I love watching, I used to watch Jon Stewart and the Colbert, and that's sort of the sugar that makes the harsh medicine go down for me. Mm-hmm. Is there any room for kind of comedy and levity within this beyond? I understand being confident. I know we need to be sincere. We need to be honest. Mm-hmm. But do you have any thoughts on that? Because I like to try to throw a little bit of comedy not comedy, but just levity into the conversation. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd be curious to see what you think.
Well, I'm going to add it into this list because I didn't put that in there, and that is an excellent question.
And it is a good question, and I see Greg put something. Greg's put a lot of stuff in the chat, so I would encourage people to go there and look. But I agree with Greg. Comedy can enrage people, and if you're not good at it, then I wouldn't do it. I mean, some people just aren't good at it. And
if I wasn't good at it, I would not be wearing this Hawaiian shirt. I think the shirt speaks for my comedy capability. But that's true too. I've seen bad comedians fail, and I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I've done public speaking before, outside of politics, and I've kind of gotten a feel for it. You're right. It's sort of a boomer bust kind of a situation.
Well, you have to be careful, I guess, is what Lisa's saying. I think she's right. Comedy can be great. I think Al Franken did a fabulous job on the campaign trail. He kind of clammed up when he got to Congress because, as you do, you want to be seen as serious and all of that.
He still used it sometimes.
Yeah, he still used it sometimes.
And he's good at it.
Then A.B. Klobuchar took over as the funny senator. But if you, I think it's a great idea. Making people laugh puts people at ease, and you're also more likable when you do it. And if you're making your laughs, you're getting your laughs from being honest and and with your integrity intact, and you're not slamming somebody else. I love John Oliver. I watch John Oliver all the time. He's got the ad hominem attacks. He's going after these people, going by the throat, and it's hilarious. Don't do that.
Don't be Louis Black. I don't know. I love Louis. I don't have
Louis
the
Black.
Power to actually pull off Louis Black.
Louis Black is the craziest guy in the world, and I love him. But there are other funny people out there, and having that clever rhetorical flair that you might put into something. If you can pull it off, absolutely go for it. Just don't be mean, and don't be dishonest. And I think you should be.
I just want to say, I think that President Obama might have been one of our funniest presidents.
I agree.
He used the humor fairly often, subtle, and it was often him finding something else humorous, and that's why he was. And so the National Press Award conferences are probably the place to look for that.
Yes.
Right, I think that's a good point too, because Obama was a very dry humorist. Like, you had to fight. It was subtle enough that if you didn't get it, it didn't offend anybody. But the ones that it landed with the people that knew what to look for. Like, I don't want to come across as like the carrot top of, But you're right. It depends on what kind of comedy it is. I think that's a good point to make, right? Like, which is, you don't want to be like the over the top guy, But if you can kind of throw some subtleties in that resonates at a level that is unnoticed by those who wouldn't appreciate it, I think it's a decent strategy. But it's to your point, Greg, it's a risky one. If you go too far, it doesn't work well every time.
Yeah, that makes all sorts of sense with both of you.
I can just recall in my head a lot of conversations with successful politicians that were private conversations in which they were very funny, but no one ever saw them being funny in public.
Right.
So I think a lot of people avoid it for that reason. I'm thinking, but I agree. It is a way to.
Like some people are absolutely shocked that Mark Dayton is one of the funniest people you will ever hear. And for those not from Minnesota, Mark Dayton was our governor, and his family owns and runs Target, that whole thing. And but Mark Dayton is one of the funniest people I have ever met in my life. He's absolutely hilarious, and also with a dry sense of humor. So watch people who do it well and see how that goes. Mm-hmm. So. Okay, be yourself. And what I mean by that is I see this a lot. Lisa and I are in a Toastmasters club, and what happens a lot of times is when people get up in front of a group, they turn from being regular Joe to being official Joe, to being the person who's a speech maker. And now I'm going to affect a speech making way of delivery. All of us do it. I do it. But it's hard. But the more you can work yourself into it, I mean, I know I'm goofy and it comes across, but that's me. And if I'm doing that, I'm more comfortable in that space. So try to be yourself and look at people who do it really well. Nancy Pelosi has just been masterful here. She is. I just watch her and just am amazed at what she can do. And she can be funny, but she is also, she's herself. You see that fighting Nancy Pelosi. She doesn't take it from anybody. Joe Biden is really good at it. He's a very warm person, but he's also himself. You see that. What you see is what you get. John Lewis, a much more, sedate kind of a very serious way of approaching things. But boy, that guy was authentic throughout his entire life. And then my favorite from the convention, hands down, best speech I saw, Michelle Obama. Holy moly. She always knocks it out of the park, and she just right there, she just got into the Hall of Fame MVP with that one. It was amazing. I mean, she had every aspect of what you want in authenticity. She had heart. She had the basically saying, she's saying how dangerous this is, but in kind of, I don't want to say a motherly way, but an empathetic way, so that this is important. We can't allow this to happen to us. I just love her thing. Should be required reading and listening by everyone, and you have to watch her do it too, because she does just a great job of just coming across with all the body language and the rest. Okay, I'll move on. Radiate compassion. Again, that's what we're about, liberals. I call it that, I think I mentioned before. No, I didn't. The Greeks had a name for this type of love, which is agape. And the idea is it's love that is universal, unconditional, and action-based, meaning that if you actually truly love people, then you're going to do something about it. You're going to do something for them, with them, whatever. And that's the kind of thing that I think is at the heart of the liberal worldview, the empathy. And I like empathy as a word, but I keep coming more and more to thinking that the word really is love in this agape sense. So have that. Define yourself. I think we talked a little bit about that. Make sure you define yourself and don't let your opponent do it. So that's a good way to be authentic, because you've gotten your word out there about who you really are. Also, be the person who says, I see it a different way, which is a great way to change the frame. And you come across not as somebody who's ramming something down somebody's throat. You come across as saying, here's something else you might consider. I see it this way. What do you think about that? And that makes you authentic also, because you're not attacking the other person. You're not saying what they think is stupid. You're just saying, I look at it differently, non-threatening. And then stay people-focused. I've said that 5 million times, so I won't go any more into that. And then, lastly, stories. Again, collect stories if you're a candidate, if you're anybody, collect stories that illuminate what's happening with the issues. And collect firsthand stories of real people and their real outcomes. So the only way you're going to be authentic is if you heard this story from the person who experienced it, or if you experienced it yourself. Don't tell secondhand or third-hand stories. Well, my cousin told me. You don't want that story. But
no, your cousin, it's like your cousin's friend. If
Oh,
your
yeah.
cousin told you a story, and
Depends on the cousin.
well, and then they were okay with you sharing that story, then yeah, you can tell that story. But not if it's like, my cousin's friend's sister or whatever.
Right.
That's getting too far away.
Yeah. And permission is important too. If you are going to use this as a candidate or in public, ask people if it's all right to share the story. You don't have to use their names, and you can tell them that too. And that's important. And then always put your story in a moral context. There's no reason to tell the story if you're not going to say what's right or wrong about what the story illuminates. Very important. So to explicitly state the right and wrong. That's our presentation tonight. ConnectionsLab.org